Hello everyone and welcome to another video. A while ago I talked about the highest throughput possible on a ride in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2. 4000 guests per hour is quite high, and the highest I achieved was about 21,000 per hour on this 4-stationed twister coaster. But what if I told you that I found a way to absolutely shatter that record? And not with a roller coaster, no, with a toilet. And I'm not talking about closing your toilets until everyone needs to pee, so that for a very short time you have a ridiculous throughput once you reopen them. No, this is consistent throughput over a time span of multiple years. The setup is super simple. All you need is a path tile, a maze, another path tile, these 3 stalls, a handyman and an entertainer. That's it. This tiny 3x6 theme park, which I will call a maze trap, produces the highest throughput on a ride ever. So how does this work? Well, guests that go on the maze will exit on the other side and be trapped with only access to the 3 stalls. Once they are there, they will enter an endless cycle of buying food, drinks and expelling it on the porcelain throne. But how is it possible that they don't eventually want to go home? Whenever you trap guests in a park outside of a queue line, it always ends up with them wanting to go home, and once guests are going home, they won't go on any ride or buy anything from a stall. Let's see what the parameters for deciding whether a guest wants to go home actually are. There is a function for exactly this, called peep decide whether to leave park, which is called every few seconds while a guest is walking. The most important part of this function is this bit. This shows that as long as a guest has at least 55 out of 255 energy, at least 45 happiness and at least $5 on them, they will never leave the park. In parks without money there is obviously no cash requirement, and in return the energy and happiness requirements are a bit higher at 70 and 60 respectively. So this setup must be somehow keeping the guests happy, energized and filled with money. The money part is obvious, that's just the ATM. You don't actually need the ATM if you make your stalls free, but then you won't make enough money to keep the ads that generate the guests going. If you do skip the ATM, you will have a spot free to build a separate food and drink stall instead of the Art Deco food stall, which sells both. Energy and happiness are a bit trickier. If we watch a few guests that are in the maze trap, we can see that their energy level never goes down. If it's not at the maximum, it will go up every now and then after the guest has eaten some food, so eventually they will all get to the maximum energy. The happiness is even weirder. Sure, the entertainer will keep it high, but the entertainer is actually not necessary once the guests have entered the loop of buying stuff and going to the toilet. It's only there to decrease the chance of the guests wanting to go home before they enter this cycle. Without the entertainer, we can see that the happiness goes down and back up a little bit regularly. Guests do get happiness from buying stuff, but this happens way more frequently than they buy something, so it must be something else. I've looked through the code, inspecting every instance of a change in the energy target and the happiness target, but I can't quite figure out why this is happening. Another big question is, how don't they become lost? Because once a guest cannot find a ride, their happiness goes down big time for sure. I have a feeling this has to do with the fact that they're constantly bumping into the stalls, which somehow resets the countdown. However this all exactly works, the point is that they don't get lost and that their happiness, energy and cash levels stay high, meaning the guests will never leave the park. But wait, why does the ride need to be there? Why can't we just trap the guests in a park with just some stalls? Well, there is another way that guests can want to leave the park, which is this function right here. If the guest has not been on a ride yet and can't find a ride to go on, it will eventually want to go home. The maze makes sure that only guests that have been on a ride get trapped. You can do a lot with this. For example, here I have beaten Amity Airfield with a maze trap and nothing else. You have no maze available here, but that's fine, as any ride that guests will go on will do, so I used the launched freefall instead. You may also notice that this is in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2 Vanilla. I usually use OpenRCT2, but I always test these things in the original game as well, because sometimes the behavior will be a little bit different. I did have a hunch it would work though, as the original discoverer of the maze trap, GS John 25, did it in Rollercoaster Tycoon Classic. Looking at over 3000 guests on a single tile, I know that a lot of you are wondering why on earth overcrowding isn't an issue. Like many weird behaviors, this is the result of a perfectly normal function not taking into account extreme exploits like these. A guest only checks for overcrowdedness when it moves onto a different path tile. Since there is only one path tile here, that check never happens. If I do build a second tile, the average guest happiness and the park rating quickly go down, because now there is overcrowding. You may also notice that I don't have a drink stall or a toilet in this park. It turns out that you don't actually need those if all you care about is getting the guests and keeping them happy enough for the park rating to stay high. You do need them for the premise of this video though, which is to get the highest possible throughput on a ride ever. Because if you do have both a food and a drink stall, guests will enter the infinite loop of buying food and drinks and then releasing their demons on the big white throne. Since both food and drinks make them need to go, they will go to the toilet the most frequently of all the 3 stalls. Even the combined food and drink sales from the Art Deco food stall can't beat the guests per hour that the toilet produces. So how many guests per hour can you get on this toilet? With exactly 1000 guests in the maze trap, you can already see quite a consistent stream of purchases being made, with the 10-cent ones being from the toilet. This is between 5,000 and 6,000 guests per hour, rivaling the best single station rides. The guest limit in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2 is 9,601, but with the handyman and such taking up a few sprites, the highest guest count I got to is 9,593. This gives quite a bit of lag, so I'll make the guests invisible to get rid of that lag. What's interesting is that the guests seem to pee in waves here. If we fast forward a lot, we can see that the guests per hour number fluctuates between about 25,000 and 75,000. To get an average, I did a several year long test and calculated that this toilet gets about 49,500 guests per hour, over twice that of the best roller coaster. As the title of this video indicates, this is not the maximum possible, and we'll get to that later, but first I want to see what the peak guests per hour number is with the vanilla guest limit. If we wait for rain and then build an info kiosk, every guest will buy a map and an umbrella at the same time. It takes a little while for the throughput to be updated, but once it does, it shows a staggering 230,000 guests per hour. This is just a short peak, as guests can only buy umbrellas and maps once, but this is the highest number I have ever seen there with the original guest limit without using cheats. With the $20 umbrellas, this also leads to the highest peak profit of over 2 million euros per hour. We can go higher though, as OpenRCT2 has raised the guest limit to over 65,000. Having this many guests already causes a fair amount of lag in a normal park, but when they're all on a single tile, the lag becomes extreme, which is why I stopped at 50,000 guests. When they're off screen, I can reach almost 60 FPS at normal game speed, but as soon as the guests come into view, it takes multiple seconds to process a single frame. This is completely unplayable, and making the guests invisible no longer removes the lag in this version of OpenRCT2. To make the video still watchable, I'll record all the throughput numbers without the maze trap on the screen, and then I'll edit in one with just a few thousand guests. First, the toilet, which is getting nearly 100 customers every single second, resulting in a guests per hour number that's over 250,000. Over an 8-year period, the average was 260,262, which is the highest consistent throughput I've ever seen in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2. And it's on a freaking toilet. Never in my life did I expect this to happen, but it did. We're not quite done yet, as once again we can also measure peak performance with the information kiosk. There is a little bit of a problem here though, as even though we have over 5 times as many guests, we don't even get twice the number of guests per hour compared to vanilla. The vanilla limit gave a peak performance of about 230,000 and here we only get 430,000. This is because the 100,000 purchases that are made in a single guests per hour update are more than the limit of what the game can process. To get around this, I staggered the purchases over multiple updates so that no single one is too big. The guests per hour number is based on the number of customers in the last 5 minutes, so as long as all the guests buy a map and an umbrella within 5 minutes, we'll get to the maximum. And this maximum is insanely high, at over 1.1 million guests per hour, and the profit reaches an insane 11.1 million euros an hour. And that is the story of how a toilet became the most popular ride in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 history. Click here to see what the longest possible queue line is. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.